Quick question before we start. Have you ever finished work, driven home, sat on the couch, and stared into the void for the next 3 hours? Yeah, then you're in the right place.
You're listening to the Spacious Brain podcast, where real neurodivergent humans with real jobs and real daily chaos overshare with pride. Minus the glossy, my ADHD is my superpower nonsense. Hi, I'm Noemi, a scientist, a neurodiversity coach. Yes, someone who will absolutely derail into a story from when I was 12 because I'm ADHD and tangents are my love language. If you ever felt alone or felt like the Temu version of neurodivergent because you're not an entrepreneur, not a CEO, and you forget to eat and drink on the same day, you're in the right place. Let's keep this real.
Today, I'm joined by Dotun, a creative and deeply thoughtful man who grew up in Nigeria, moved to England in his late teens, and discovered ADHD much later in life. Dotun grew up surrounded by strong cultural expectation about achievement, education, and respectable careers, all while he loved drawing, storytelling, and anything creative. We talk about struggling at schools, jumping between jobs, working himself into the ground to appear capable, and why being assessed by a Nigerian professional who understood his cultural background mattered. Dotun shares how a diagnosis brings language and understanding for a very difficult journey. Hi, Dotun. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'll start with the same question that I ask everybody, and is who is Dotun?
Yeah, so who am I? Who am I? Well, I guess you could say I'm a creative, middle-aged guy who has gotten diagnosed with ADHD later in life and grew up my formative years in West Africa, Nigeria, and sort of struggled through, I suppose, in some ways, finding my place in a society that perhaps values to some level high achieving individuals and some traditional values and especially things that have to do with things that relate more to careers and what you do in life, so to speak, and trying to navigate balancing my life expectations, with the things I can do with these life expectations, I guess, by my society. And so at the moment, I currently work in technology within an academic setting at a university. Yeah, outside of work, at the moment, truth be told, there's I'm very boring. There's not much about me these days. Outside of work, I'm just a bit of a homebody. I spend a lot of time at home. And truth be told, sometimes spend a lot of it worrying about the future, ruminating and just hanging in there. At some point, I suppose, maybe a few years back, I was a bit more active. But yeah, these days, just a bit of a homebody, I guess.
Thank you for sharing all of this. And I don't think there is anything boring about it. Sometimes we just need our alone time and then it's okay.
Yeah, definitely a lot. I do the rates. I mean, I'll tell you a funny thing. For years, I literally, I drive, and there's a spot at a Tesco near where I work. I used to work, not where I work now. Where I used to work, and it was a routine for me for the past 4 years, and I would just drive there and park and just sit there. And it was one of my little things I would do to de-stress or decompress after work and stuff. So I do like a lot of alone time, and I still do it till today, which might be weird for some people, but I don't know. It was my thing. It was my thing that I would just go there and park and just sit there and people watch, or if I had to have lunch or eat something there.
And you said that you were diagnosed later in life. So can you walk us through, when did you get your diagnosis and what brought you to seek one?
Yeah, so I think I'd always, of course, had a sense of like something might be wrong, but not really knowing exactly what it was because ADHD is such a strange thing. It's not something that I could particularly point towards to say this, like it's not something I could explain. I can't explain it. I don't know, how to tell a medical professional or anyone this is what's wrong with me, But I think a job that I got in London at the time, so I worked in media, and the job at the time, it was called, my job title was called media coordinator, which is basically like being a project coordinator as you would have it in perhaps any other industry. And that particular job, just a lot of the, I suppose, characteristics of that role, I think really amplified my ADHD problems, basically, I think. Now, even prior to that, yes, I've had several jobs and things like that in the past, like maybe jumping from job to job, especially when I was a bit younger, like call center work. I did a lot of call center work, and I'd be out of there by between 3 to 6 months. That was always my my time frame. And next thing you know, I'd be at the next call center and the next call center and the next call center. Got to a point where I'd gone to so many call centers that I'd even be seeing people, or we start meeting each other, like other people from other call centers. So we start meeting each other there, and so but at some point I wanted to progress, move on to other things. So anyway, so I end up doing, I'm at this media job, and the nature of that job is that it requires a huge level of sort of organization. I'm dealing with a lot of media files that require a processing. So to give you a good idea of what I did, basically on a high level. So I'm sure you know Netflix and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
so imagine having to work with a platform similar. And my job was to, all the movies that would come out maybe next week or in the next few months, I have to process those shows, movies. Could be, I don't know, season 1 to 5 of CSI or something. Or yeah, and I'm saying CSI on purpose because a lot of those movies, TV shows, they have so many long seasons.
Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, so I always dreaded if I looked at the calendar and I would see something like CSI, or I don't know, I'd be like, oh no, this is gonna take forever. So imagine
Grey's Anatomy.
Grey's Anatomy,
24
20
seasons.
seasons. If it was like a one-off show or something that had just like a few episodes or like a two-part series, okay. But man, the long ones, I'm like, and I'd have to watch it, not watch the whole thing. We had someone who did that specifically, but I have to sort of brush through each episode to make sure there's no problems, that the sound matches sometimes when you watch a movie, it doesn't match. Yeah. So I have to watch out for things like that. If it's not working or it's too bad and we can't fix it, we have to send it back to the studios and stuff like that. Anyway, that's just one aspect of what I did. And then there's other things like chasing after the images that you'd see on the platform. So that means I have to talk to everyone else in different departments, chasing people left, right, and center, emails, looking at the schedules, writing down how far did I get with this movie, how far did I get with that one, this one was stuck here. And depending on where I've reached for the whole day, I might have to pass it on to a colleague who's come over the next day. So you get a sense of some of the duties I had to do, and this would be on a huge calendar for the next month or two. And I really started struggling because my level of organization was just not great. I would forget things, prioritize properly. There'd be shows where I should have done that first because it's been flagged as priorities. I wouldn't. I'd do something else instead, maybe because it was quicker or easier. And then I'd start to panic towards the end of the week. Oh no, and I remember even getting into trouble the first time because of this. And, I felt so horrible. I felt so bad. Like I just felt like I wasn't really meeting up the standard, and funny thing is I was on contract at the time. So I felt like if you mess this up, you're just gonna lose the job eventually and you're not gonna get renewed. And it's interesting because at that time I thought, look, I'm not good at things like organizing or prioritizing. I'm just going to work hard, like super hard. And I remember walking home feeling horrible, but I thought I'm just gonna work super hard. And lo and behold, that's exactly what I did. I just would get in and just power through like a machine, 7 to 7. Now, because I used to work from 7 to 7, and just grinding through. I'd put headphones on my head and put on like what's it called? White noise. I love white noise. It helps me a little bit. So I would use things like an old air conditioner, like the ones you used to have back in the old days, the noisy
Yeah.
ones. I like those ones, or like a cabin of an airline or airplane. I'd use that too, and just to help me focus a bit more. And And I would just power through every media file, media asset we had, updating all the notes and stuff. I didn't care if it was, I'd do the one of 15 seasons before the one of three. I was just going one after the other. I wasn't prioritized. I just thought, as long as I can finish everything on this list, I've done it. You see what I mean? So that was my strategy. Like, look,
Yeah.
I don't know how to. As long as I finish everything I can see, then I've done it. But then on my way home, I would be dead mentally, physically, and I never knew what was wrong. I was like, what is wrong with me? Why am I so tired? And anyway, I did that for a few months, and of course, when I had my managers review, they were happy with me. Everything seemed fine. But it's only a matter of time. It doesn't last, does it? Suddenly, after a while again, the old habits start to come back. And so, yeah, that's how I kind of just knew that something's off, and I kind of need to like speak to someone. I need to do something. Something's really off, because
Mm.
obviously this thing is causing me also to be sad and depressed and have, all these other issues on the side. So it was that job, I think, that really, really kicked me up the behind, like something is definitely up, So, yeah, yeah.
And what brought you then to actually go for a diagnosis? Because you got to the point that you knew that something was wrong.
Mm.
You knew that you had to talk to somebody. So
Yeah.
what happened after?
Yeah, I think so. What happened was, I think when I started to get to the point where, uh, the depression, just feeling really down all the time.
Mm.
So I would be indoors for days. I wouldn't come out. I wouldn't speak to anyone. I lived in London at the time, London, and I had housemates. And I wouldn't even see anyone for days. It would be, and I'd just be alone. Not stepping outside, eating badly, and stuff like that. Gaining weight, feeling ill, and it got to a point where I didn't know what to do, Yeah, I didn't really know what to do. I was feeling almost trapped within myself. It's hard to explain. It's feeling almost trapped within yourself because just so many things, all these things are coming together. And of course, these leads to worrying about the future. Like, what's going to happen with me? Because I just seem to struggle with every work I have, And I really thought I'd like this one, but it's happened again. Because over the years, I always keep thinking to myself, I am kind of a weird optimist in a way. I always keep thinking, it'll be the next one. It'll be the next one. It'll be the next one. Don't worry, when you get the next one, that'll be it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, if I think about it, I've done this for over 2 decades now. It's never that new stuff. Something always happens. And I think at that point where I was feeling so bad, I would have to even force myself sometimes to go out for a walk, but it got too much. And I had to then, that's when well, initially I didn't know about diagnosis or anything at the time. I didn't know what was wrong with me, you know, but that was the point where I seeked out some help online, and I found this men's group meeting thing in central London somewhere. And I had to force myself to get on a train and go to central London just to, see if I could meet people and see what's happening and stuff like that. And it was through that. I don't know if you want me to get into that now, but it was basically, that was the event that triggered me realizing I had ADHD and that I needed to, seek treatment. Yeah.
So you went to this men's group and you
Yeah.
spoke to other people. And what happened? Or you,
Yeah. So at the men's group, uh, it's a huge group, got quite a few people in there. And I think one of the things that made me think, because I'm quite a thinker, like just looking at all these people, all these men, and everyone looks normal. Like in a sense that, like, you could see these people on the road every day and they just look like regular folk. And then suddenly everyone's having problems, and but on some level I couldn't relate to everyone. But then there was this one guy I sat opposite, and I noticed that every time I spoke, he seemed to look at me and have this. He nodded constantly, and every time like he spoke, I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I get it. Like I'm like that." And so somehow we clocked each other in that sense. And I think, so after we had had our session for the day, we then went to a pub, as you do, and we exchanged numbers. And I think maybe about a few days later, I can't remember now, maybe a few days later. And funny enough, even that day he called me, I wasn't doing great. I was just there in bed, mentally paralyzed, can't do anything. And then he just called and he was like, I just wanted to say, hi, how you doing? And I think I kind of, again, I don't remember fully what I said, but I must have just blurted out all my problems, I must have just, said everything from work to home to relationships to, and I'm like, I just don't know what's happening with my life. Why is it always like this, and I'm tired. I'm just tired. And he just listened to everything, didn't interrupt me at all. And then at the end, he just goes, I think you have ADHD. And when he said that, I paused for a second because I didn't really know what ADHD was. That's just the truth. Yeah, I've heard of it before, but I don't know much about it. I don't know really. I just thought I have depression. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just didn't know what it was, and I didn't pay too much attention. But he did say to me, go and see, find out about it," because he says I have it too, and it sounds similar to what I have, which is probably why we could relate to each other. So, and I'll be honest, I didn't really pay attention at that point. I went to work, continued work. And at some point again at work, I was researching just, I don't know, by coincidence, there's a CNN reporter, Lisa Ling. I was just reading about her because I love her show on CNN back then. I think she's left now. And I was reading about her, just mini biography online. And as I kept reading about her, I was like, she sounds like me, like, again, the difficulty she was having at school and trying to find her place, trying to be a perfect model ethnic minority in America. But then she found her place with like journalism. And then
Mhm.
she just focused on that. So of course she's quite successful today. Anyway, it's interesting that I saw that within the week, and then again a few days later again, I started just searching online for like my symptoms. I didn't put nothing to do with ADHD. By this time, I didn't even think anything ADHD, whatever. I was just searching for my symptoms and things that have been happening to me over the years. I'd put things like jumping from job to job, this and this and that. And then as I place that in Google, the first video that pops up is this lady in America sat in her car, and the title was My Life with ADHD. And I clicked on it and I proceeded just to watch this young lady just sound like me, like literally. In fact, I don't know what else to say, but everything she said, almost 99% was like my life in a strange way.
Yeah.
And, of course, this led to a lot of unhappiness, or happiness in a way, a lot of crying, a lot of just thinking, wait, is this what it was all along? Like, like there is something. It's not like I'm just lazy or, I just have bad luck of some sort. Like, there's actually a thing,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the joy came from. The
Mm.
joys from there was something. I knew there was something, but if you don't know what it is, then how do you tell anyone? They don't, so yeah. And that was it. That was the moment that, watching that video. And of course, then suddenly I started scrolling the comment section, seeing people, that are like me. And just, yeah, yeah. I was very happy, sad, but happy, a mixture of emotions, but that I know, yeah.
It is so powerful what you're sharing. The reason why I'm doing this podcast is exactly that. I imagine people just finding an episode by pure chance or because somebody reposted it. And then they hear your story and they're like, I'm not alone. I'm not
Yeah.
alone. This happens to me as well. And as you said, all of a sudden you have the language to explain what you've been going through and what other people have failed to see and understand. Because the reality is that if you don't even have the language yourself, how can you
Hmm.
advocate for what you need, support you might need?
Exactly.
It's impossible. It's really powerful also to see that, there is the pain when you explain it and when you tell your story and you say the pain that you were going through, but there is also the joy, like I could see it, I could feel it. And I think it's fantastic to share this sort of thing, so thank you. And one question that I want to ask is, you mentioned that you grew up in Nigeria, and how was it when you were a child? How did you feel?
I think growing up in Nigeria as a child, well, shall I say that well, compared to perhaps a lot of the population, I grew up with an upper middle class family, sort of. So I'm grateful for that, at least the early years of my life. So, in terms of just life in general, we're well provided for. There's no problems there. But Nigeria, it can be complex because it's a country that's a mix of things. It's a very religious country in some context. There's a lot of expectations to do well in life. People like, and there's always jokes about Nigerians like money and huge achievements and things like that. So when you're in this sort of environment, there's a bit of pressure to be someone, do something. And right from young, my parents, especially my dad, was huge on achievements, academics, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But unfortunately, this is where I think a lot of my initial stress in life started from because I, quite frankly speaking, sucked at school. I was not that good. And, um, that caused a lot of problems with my dad at the time growing up. So, and that's difficult because obviously, as a child or young, you don't really know what's going on. You wish to be like the other kids who are very good, and you try your best, but for some reason, nothing was working. And unfortunately, as I said, I'm from a very cultural, old fashioned style country where, as far as they're concerned, you're not working hard enough.
Yeah.
So you're up against the older generation, the adults, the baby boomer generation, of course. I was raised by baby boomer generation parents. I am an elder millennial, which some miss Gen X by 1 year. So some people like to call us exennials or xennials, something like that, but elder millennials. But yeah, their ways of raising it was tougher. It was much more, you're not working hard enough, you're not pushing hard enough, get with it, chop chop. There's a lot of discipline and stuff like that, and I get it, there's places for that, not knowing you have a condition and just having to deal with the constant competition, the constant comparison. And then once you don't hit that benchmark, you start not liking yourself. And suddenly there's
Yeah.
this buildup of self-esteem issues and difficulty. But not, of course, not knowing what's wrong, you keep trying, but all you know is I could do try, but it's not working. But
Mm.
unfortunately, as I said, because of the nature of our culture, no one's going to listen to you, unfortunately, being a young, especially if you're young as well. Young people's opinions are not particularly revered in my culture. When you're next to the adults, the very wise elders, your opinions are nothing. So you learn to live with it in some way. You learn to accept that, like, well, no one's going to listen to me. No one's going to be on my side. Not the teachers, not the parents, not the uncles, not the aunties. You're on your own. Especially back in those days, Yeah. So in that aspect, I think growing up back home was tough. Yeah. Yeah.
How was school for you? I nodded a lot while you were saying these things about Nigeria because it's in some ways it's pretty similar to how I grew up in Italy because it's kind of like the same thing, like a very religious country. And you then have like you're a child, so everybody else knows better than you.
Yeah.
What you feel is wrong,
It's
like to start
irrelevant.
with, because and then you have to do better, you have to behave in a certain way, you have to be successful. It's all of that. Like I had a very, in a way, similar experience, we can say.
Yeah.
So how was school for you?
Even let me just say, one of the greatest feelings I have now is being an adult.
Mm.
Like, because I do not miss school. Like, let me just let you know, I do miss my, of course, friends and the good experiences you have as a young child or a teenager or stuff like that. But apart from that, I don't miss school because it was just a constant reminder of how not good I was or how useless I was or something like that. So yeah, school was horrible because academically it was a nightmare. I was a creative child, basically. Some people say, I don't know if you've heard about left brain, right brain.
Hmm.
Scientists to say it's not entirely true. I get what they're trying to say. It's not entirely overly logical in that way, but there might be some truth to it. So I think I'm just a very right brain powered child. So I was good at drawing. I was good at creating things. I was good at arts. Interestingly, I was good at English class too, for some reason. But that was about it. Anything else, I mean, maths was the worst. So anything logical was a nightmare for me. And unfortunately, in a society like that, they don't really respect you if you're doing something artsy, or it's not really regarded as something valuable to society. So I used to feel bad, like, oh God, why did you give me this brain and not a left-sided brain? But especially when you're like in primary school, it was kind of cool to be able to draw because on some level, I wasn't really like a prominent person at school. I'm probably forgettable in some ways, but maybe because when arts class came around and I would go from suddenly maybe someone no one probably might remember to somebody that, because I would always come top of the class in arts. So I'd
Mm.
go from zero to straight to the top. I think in every class I've ever been, I was either number one or two, mostly one in anything arts design related, to the point where if I was drawing in class or whatever, I'd have classmates and stuff, everyone just surround me at my desk like I was Michelangelo or something. Like they would just surround me completely. So that was the one thing I was reasonably good at. But that was it, and everything else was a struggle. So this was not good for conversations at home with the dad. And yeah, so it made my life difficult. What else about school? I suppose in the same context, I could remember things such as like even the daily activities of school. Every term my mom would buy us new bags and all the books and everything we needed for school. And honestly, by the time, in just a matter of 2 weeks, I had lost all my pens, my books would be a mess in my bag, all the edges would be ripped. I would have my lunch stuff, maybe cookies and stuff like that, all crumbled inside my backpack. It was
Mm.
always a constant mess, you know?
Yeah.
And in contrast, my sibling, my sister, perfect. Even after a whole term, her backpack would look exactly the same way as it was at the beginning of term. But by that
Immaculate.
time, immaculate, the same. Like not even like a not even like a scratch on her notebooks, or not even the edges, nothing. And in contrast, well, me, I'd have lost my notes, the pens and pencils. Oh my God, I go through those daily. I was a huge mess. Yeah, I could never organize myself. I was very distractible, but I still enjoyed school. I mean, especially back in those days, all I wanted to do was get to school and like tell my friends about, did you watch this movie or this cartoon? I could watch cartoons for hours. I could recite. I was the kind of kid that could recite movie theme songs. I could sing everything. I could,
I could say the whole
yeah,
script of the
the whole
Sword in the Stone
script.
word by word.
Yeah, I remember one time I could say almost like the first play of Lion King from as soon as the credits came in, and I would do the voices as well from Scar I would just do all the voices. I
Yeah.
was that I was that kind of I was that kind of child. Yeah,
Same thing.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
when I was a child, like I went to school with the nuns. So
yeah.
in primary school, I think my teacher, who was a nun, she was very good because she understood like the reward system was working very well with me. So she motivated me to do better while she was very tough with my other classmates. And by tough, I mean it, tough. Like she was slapping other children and stuff because, that was acceptable back then.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. For me, like she knew that the way to motivate me was the reward system. And because I think I was people pleasing since then. For me it worked fantastically. And I found a way to kind of make it work. But she also nurtured a lot of art. And like we did drama at primary school. And I
Mm,
remember this thing like when you were saying, I really love everything that was artistic. It's exactly the same for me.
mm,
I remember when I was in primary school, we did one year the Little Prince play. And I
Uh-huh.
was the little prince. And I was like,
Okay.
it's weird because the little prince is a boy, but
What?
I am the little prince. But that, and exactly as you described, like that hating school, to this day, one of my worst nightmare is that like I wake up because I dream that I went back to high school and I have to do it all over again. And I'm like, I wake up like completely like soaked in sweat because I'm like,
Yeah,
no, there is no way.
yeah,
That's it.
yeah,
Life is over if I have to do that.
yes, yeah. I have
So
those
I
as well.
completely
Yeah.
understand what you said.
Yeah, I've had dreams of forgetting my assignment and then thinking I'm gonna get beating at school today because I forgot my assignment, or I didn't do my homework, and stuff like that. And the thought of going to school, and there's always like that teacher. You know what I mean? There's always, and it's always the maths teacher for some reason. The maths teachers, and they have the way they look, the way they dress. Like, oh no, I can just see an image of him and the fear, and this is back in the day, when even getting into maths class, he might just decide that day as soon as he walks in, tell everyone to stand up, and he just randomly starts asking multiplication tables. I don't know if you guys had that, but he
Yes.
would just, they would just like everyone stand up and he would just randomly start asking you 12 times that, or you, and you would get beaten if you missed it, like if you got it wrong. And this dread every morning, as back in the 80s, was just like my heart would be, it was like, it was so traumatic, like,
Yeah.
just goodness me. And even that thought, as I said, as an adult, I've had those nightmares every now and again where, oh no, I forgot my homework, or I didn't, so and so is going to be angry and I'm going to get punished. And so, yeah.
Yeah. One of the punishments for us when I was in primary school was that if you didn't study something and it was a particular subject, for the next day, you had to bring an entire notebook
Mm,
written with that same topic. So
wow.
imagine that it was, I don't know, you didn't study like one of those multiplication table. You had to do an entire notebook filled with that.
Yeah,
The physical pain of that alone
yeah,
is
yeah,
like, I don't know if anybody has ever tried to do that. It's not
yeah, yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah. We had
And
those too.
yeah, so completely relate to what you were saying.
Yeah, yeah, oh my God. Yeah, I don't like to remember it because I think also because you feel bad about yourself. You might look at other people who are more academically smart and think, why can't I be like that? Or I've tried to read this stuff and stuff. I just don't get it, or I can't retain it as well as somebody else. So that happens too. But yeah, it doesn't leave good memories of school days. But as a child, I think also a child's brain is remarkable because you have so much joy, generally speaking, as a child.
Yeah.
And regardless of some of the difficulties you're facing, I think for me, I had to deal with some of that as well.
And, you spoke about also having difficulties connecting with your dad.
Mm.
And looking back now and with your diagnosis and everything, what do you think that it was that you needed from him at the time? What do you think he needed that maybe he didn't have access to?
I think that, like, at the time, for me, I felt like I needed a sort, definitely encouragement, but like more, I think I needed an acknowledgement of who I really was. Because it's funny you asked me that question because it's one of those questions I've thought about myself, that like I thought, if I had a child, what will I do? And for me, it was an acknowledgement of my child, of acknowledgement of who they were. Like, what can I see in this child that I feel this is how I can encourage them through what they're good at and look towards the future for what perhaps this child could be good at. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I had like a
Yeah.
very extroverted child, I might be thinking towards the future, like, hey, you might want to consider some kind of media journalism or something where you can talk and be yourself and be out there. Because I can already see that their personality from young is very like a certain way, you know what I mean? Things like that, a kind of acknowledgement of who I was, and then not to make you feel crappy for not for who you are.
Mm.
I think that our society back then revered certain types of career types. We're just like, I know that many other cultures are quite similar. These are quite common in like the Asian cultures, like Korea. Sometimes I see it in these K dramas or in India. If you're not a doctor, lawyer, engineer, you're a disgrace to the family. Basically. It's just how it goes. Thing else is there are a few other careers here and there that's acceptable. I don't know, architect, so stuff like that. Yeah, that's how it was. So anything else beyond that was just be prepared to hear some insults. And yeah, yeah. And so that was difficult. Yeah. So I wished that at that time they had that discernment. It's a tough one, Naomi, if I'm honest, because there's a part of you that thinks they didn't know, right? Like you think, but they didn't know. You think,
But that
okay,
doesn't stop the pain.
it doesn't stop exactly. I think also because of perhaps some of the words and discipline that was used at the time. Those things they stick to you, even till today. The beatings don't last for me anyway. At least I think so. But a lot of the words that were spoken to me as a youngster, they stayed.
And it's also very common for ADHD. There are things that they still feel physical, like the rejection sensitive dysphoria is not just about how do we feel about rejection in general, but something that we might feel as rejection, like words, as you said, they have a physical reaction. One of the things that I always try to explain, for example, to my husband is that those feelings are stuck with me, and it takes me ages to get over them. And even if I get over them, the moment that I remember it, the physical sensation that is associated with that reemerges. And that's
Yeah,
why I think it's also difficult for us to move past like those trauma that we've had.
yeah,
And it's interesting how you said that, how you thought about what if I had a child, what I will do, because that is something that I'm doing myself with my son. It's kind of like I'm reparenting myself while I'm parenting him.
yeah,
And it is as painful as it is exceptional, I would say. So yeah,
yeah.
it is
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It's a constant battle because you think they didn't know. I get it. He didn't know, but man, I just felt under no circumstances ever should anyone say certain types of things to their own child out of
Yeah.
anger or because these things, it's going to affect your self-esteem issue. Because I had issues with this self-esteem issues, confidence, and stuff like that as you get older. And it will creep into many things. It's not just because we're talking about life now. It will affect life. So as you get older, your ability to be present or be sure of yourself or recover from things and yes, even because I do believe I have rejection sensitive dysphoria as well. Because I'm intense. If something upsets me, oh my God, it's so bad sometimes. I used to feel sick. I feel ill like
Yeah.
like I'm actually sick, like ill. So yeah, it was a it was a difficult one. But as I say, you do your best, and I try to just think, well, they didn't know any better, and they raised you as best as they thought, you know,
Yeah.
because there's a mix of because there's so much mixed into the whole thing. There's the whole elderly wisdom thing that goes into in our culture. There's the spiritual side as well. Even if I felt like I wanted to speak to someone, they just ask you to go pray about it.
Yeah.
Just go pray about it and you know and then work hard. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
But somewhere deep inside you know that yeah, but there's just something, but I don't know what it is. And of course, if I don't do well, things don't go well, the blame comes down on me again really hard. It's
Yeah.
and this spiral just it never ended. It just continued. So as you get to be an adult, what kind of adult would you become? Yeah.
And you moved then to England in your late teens, right? So at that point, when you moved here, what got easier? What got harder? And were the things that surprised you the most?
So when I moved, let me tell you, England just suited me perfect. I'm just going I'm just going to like just lay it out there. England just suited me perfectly from an academic standpoint, career, and stuff like that. Why is that? Well, generally speaking, it's a developed society. So life is, for the most part, generally more organized. The truth of the matter is, I felt used. Okay. So for the first time, I felt useful. Like, I felt like I'm somewhere now where I'm employable. I have a chance to be employed. Someone's employed me to do something, and I do it. I figured it out myself. I could do things myself because that's another thing about like societies, like in Nigeria and stuff. It's hard to do things by yourself. You need again the elders, so you're gonna need connections, parents. You want to get into a certain type of school, it's good to have connections. You want to get a job, forget about it. It's connections. It's all about who you know, who knows who,
Yeah.
that kind of
I know
stuff.
that I know that story very well. It's very similar in Italy.
Yeah, yeah. You don't just get jobs at a bank or some company. I mean, you could apply, but suddenly you'll hear that some person's son, top government official, got the job, or, this is how it is. And to be in a society where I did not need anyone, and I didn't need my dad, which I really didn't want to at the time. I mean, he's not a bad person. It's just, I think, because of how things were at the time, I didn't really want to need his help for anything. I didn't want to hear anything and suddenly there's going to be someone might use that against me in the future. No, I wanted to be somewhere where I could do things myself, you know?
Yeah.
And that England gave me that opportunity. Suddenly, I would apply for a job and I would get the job. Even if I don't get the job, like I'll get feedback, I'll try and figure out what I did wrong. Because I remember the first time I was applying for jobs and I was getting a lot of rejection. And I remember thinking, right, let me just sit down and figure out what I'm doing wrong. And I remember like Googling, this is back in the day, Googling, trying to figure out what was wrong. And I found Google was not as good as that back in the early 2000s. And I went to library, got a book on CVs and interviews, and I read, and I went, that's what I'm doing wrong. And suddenly, as soon as I read that book and I went for my next interview, I got the job. And ever since then, it's like it's been more success in terms of interviewing than, and I've managed to work for many different companies. I've worked for banks, media houses, and things like that. The kind of companies that I know for sure, the equivalent back home, there is no way I'd get in
Mhm.
except, you know, I knew someone or we knew someone who knew someone. It's all about connections back home.
Yeah.
So I felt useful. I felt I did it myself. I reorganized myself to go back to university. That's another whole long story. But again, I'll get my admissions myself. I finished my course. So for the first time ever, 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 I felt, reasonably useful. There's somewhere for me. England was also very, as I say, it's an organized country. So, as somebody who's naturally disorganized, there's a lot of things that make your life easier here. If I need information about something, there's always some government office or sub governmental office, like in a council, that you could call. I saw information about this. Just call this number. I'd call them. How do I get onto this course? What's this apprenticeship about? If they can't get it, say, we'll call you back. We'll call you back, sir. And they will. They'll call you back when they say they'll call you back. If you send an email, someone will answer you back when you send an email. I'm like, wow, this is it. They actually answer you back. Like it's not like you just send an email that flies into the atmosphere and then maybe you'll realize, yeah, nobody basically monitors that inbox. Like, all the phone numbers are working, the websites are working, and they call you back giving you information. If there's something I wanted to do, say for instance, right, say, because at the time when I arrived, perhaps I was trying to get onto a course to see if I was eligible or not because of one thing or the other. One thing I loved about the UK was there was always a way. Maybe I make a phone call. How do I do this? And the person on the other side is like, right, because of this and this, you may not be able to. What I suggest is call this department. You might be able to do this and do that and do this and do that. You see what I mean? Like everyone
They
is
gave you
trying.
the structure. They gave you a
Yeah,
structure when there was no structure.
structure.
I
Yeah,
completely get it.
yeah, and options. They give you
Yes.
options and ways to get through something to achieve something.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So none of that exists back home. I mean, they just don't, you know? So for someone like me, honestly, it was like a huge crutch, like help, to
Mm,
move on in life, like no man left behind sort of thing, you know?
yes.
You can, as long as you want to do something for yourself as well, there's options. Try this. Try. It's like when you want to get in university in the UK, right? There's A levels. If that's not for you, there's access courses. If that's not for you, there's foundation courses. If that's not for you, there's HNDs. If that's not for you, do you see what I mean? There's
Yes.
so many ways to do it. But back in my day, growing up back home, there was a one way to get in, and that was it. It was this hard exam, and
Yeah.
like that was obviously designed to cut people off because back in those days there was few universities, so of course everybody wants to go, not everyone can get in, so those exams back then were designed to cut people off, so they're brutally hard, and the questions are, well, the timing is very short,
Yeah.
so and I thought, and this thing is really common in a lot of countries, because I remember watching a documentary on China. It's very similar. They have an exam called Gaokao. It's so similar. Korea has one as well. Brazil has a similar system. Hong Kong does. I was like, wow, like man, it's brutal, but
We have the
So
same in Italy. If you want to
yeah,
get into med school, there are
yeah.
some tests that you have to do. And the tests, they have nothing to do with med school.
What you gonna do?
They have to do with, logic, or with
Yeah,
like some things are also history and stuff.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the point is that in order to do that, you have to be able to do those specific tests. Like you
yeah.
have to get into the system. And for me, it was crazy because, of course, one thing is about time and pressure. So for me, it was impossible to do because I process things in a different way. So I
Exactly. Yeah.
failed miserably the first time that I tried. And the other thing is also that with these tests, you basically have to figure out, is it better if I just try and answer or if I leave it blank? Because in a way, like
Mm,
the scoring system is like if you answer incorrectly, they deduct points, but if you don't answer, you get 0 points. So it's basically a Monte Carlo scenario in your head that needs to
mm.
run. Like, do I try or do I
Do I not
not?
even bother?
But it, for
Right.
me, was like too stressful, like was a nightmare. Needless to say, I didn't get into med school, but but I got into science, so I'm happy
Yeah.
how everything turned out to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
another question for you. It's something that we have discussed when we first met, and it's the fact that you were diagnosed by a Nigerian professional and he understood like your cultural context. Why did that matter in the sense of your diagnosis?
Yeah, I think that like it just gives, he was able to, I suppose, as someone who grew up there as well, I guess he was able to sort of see things from the perspective of, he could relate to that culture, basically. He understood, how things were done back home. And, because sometimes, obviously, when you live in like the UK, a lot of the standards for these sort of things would be done Western style, so to speak, But I think sometimes it's good to have like an international professional, because I think when you've lived back there and then obviously studied and worked here as well, you've got an advantage of looking at things from two different sides. You can also look back at your own country and see, wow, how do we handle ADHD? In what sort of ways are how is this condition presented in such a way that, like, perhaps in our culture we don't notice it. We miss it completely, because over there, of course, it's, if a child is, I don't know, maybe he has a presentation of hyperactivity, he's heavily misbehaving, he gets beaten constantly, punished constantly. If you're too daydreamy, you're not focused in class, you get yelled at, insulted, treated as though unserious. And I think it's good because someone like him, he can also look at those things, because I'm sure he's experienced similar,
Yeah.
and use that to then have conversations with me to really see, like, yeah, in our culture, this is how it is, isn't it? Like, because sometimes I may not relate completely to perhaps a lot of things from the UK from early days, early years growing up and as a child, maybe in the 80s or something like that. So yeah, I think, yeah, so that was really, it was good in that sense. It was relatable, and helped me feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
And also, even in an indirect way, to see that, like, I hope that in our society, these sort of conditions, or people starting to look at these conditions as well, because, as I say, yeah, some of these mental health conditions in our world are viewed a certain kind of way, so
Yeah.
it's good to see us involved as well.
And when you were diagnosed, what parts of yourself did you stop fighting once you had the language for them? And what are you still learning or unlearning?
I think that I had to start slowly accepting, uh, because for me, I think for a long time, I felt like my life has been very hard mentally and very slow. Like, or I should have done more. My culture doesn't help either, with that kind of stuff. So I kept thinking, oh, I should have done more. But slowly I had to start learning to accept even the little progress, whatever little progress I make. Just, try to look at your achievements, the things you've done so far, considering everything, you know. Um, it's still not easy, I think, when you've had so many decades of the way things have gone for me and not knowing I had this condition. It's hard to fight this, but I think, I'm slowly starting to, whatever things I've achieved so far, trying to be happy with myself, you know, considering, because I remember even when I got the first person I spoke to, because before I spoke to a psychiatrist. There was someone who diagnosed, well, who spoke to me pre speaking to the psychiatrist himself. I think it was a trainee. And I remember her saying to me as well, like, considering everything, like you've done a lot of stuff, looking at your CV and uni and everything, there might be people who are having difficulties still in this area, and but you've still managed to. I know it's true, but it's just that I think sometimes with ADHD, even the achievements, I don't like to acknowledge it. I always feel like, I'm like, maybe I was a bit lucky, or maybe yeah, I was like that, as soon as I get something, I'm like, you know what, maybe I was just lucky, or maybe it was easy. Or that interview, maybe it was easy and I was just lucky,
Yeah.
or whatnot, not wanting to give myself credit.
It's never an achievement. It's always like something
Yeah,
else. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, So yeah, I've been slowly trying to like accept that, try to accept it and be like, no, no, you have achieved things. Show some gratitude, be happy. Try to, accept it, Yeah. So definitely that for sure. Yeah. Things still aren't perfect. I'm still working on myself, rejection sensitivity is a thing. That can still be difficult, I still struggle with sometimes bad news and stuff happening, and
Mm.
you know, or disappointments in life. Still working on those. It's not perfect.
And I usually end up the podcast with like what I call the signature questions now. But I think this has been such a deep journey that I feel like I owe it to you to just change them and tailor them on you. So the first question that I want to ask to close out the episode is, how are you today? What part of your journey are?
Today, it's well, truthfully speaking, it's still not so easy. It's still things are still can still be challenging for me sometimes. I would have my days of what I call like a paralysis day. Where
Mm.
I just struggle to do things at times, get out of bed. And some days it's not easy, it's brutal, and there's stuff to be done. But, I decided to go on medication, and I'm still in my titration period. And so I'm working through that slowly and seeing how it changes life for me. So I'm sort of at that point as well, just trying to see, because I figured, well, I've spent all this time trying to fix this issue, but it didn't work. So I'll try I'll try the medication, see how that works. So yeah, some days are tough, and I take the good days with the bad days. Yeah, but that's all I can really say, really. But I wouldn't, it would be nice to try and end in this happy-go-lucky note. But the truth of the matter is, it's been a journey for me, and that's just the honest truth. This condition is it's crazy. It's so hard. And I always find it hard to explain what it is to people. Like I think I was trying to explain to someone recently, and I said, I don't really know how to explain it to you. I can only give you an analogy. And I said, if you had a bicycle, everybody knows bicycles. Okay. Imagine near the tires, yeah, you have lots of screws. Usually, I don't know what the screws, this one powers this gear, that gear, whatever, but there's screws. Okay. Screws are always there for a reason. Now imagine slowly just loosening one of the screws. Don't take it off completely. Just loosen one of the screws. Now, if you looked at the bicycle from the distance, it still looks okay. No, it still looks fine. Okay. So what happens when you start riding that bicycle daily? And the person was like, the tires fall off. I said, no, not really. It might stay on. Remember, there's lots of screws, but then it starts to wobble.
Yeah.
So, which means the functionality is not like everyone else's bicycle. But does the bicycle still do what it's meant to do? Probably yes. It'll still get you from A to B, just slower. It might hurt your butt a little bit. It might damage some of the other gears and components around it, but it might still get from A to B, but it might get there. It'll get there late. Everyone else has arrived, but it'll get there late. And in some ways, I feel like I am that bicycle. You're born with this condition where, from the outside, like the bicycle, people will just say, oh, you're fine.
Yeah.
But then there's this internal problem of dopamine and dopamine receptors and whatnot that unfortunately isn't, like everyone else's. So, but does it mean I can get through life possibly like the bike, but I'll have to wobble through to get to the end? And by the end, there's a lot of bruises and pain and difficulty, but I might get to the end just like everyone else. And this, it affects every aspect of your life, health, relationships, work. Suddenly everything's affected by this pattern. Yeah. So it's been a journey. And I'm slowly, I guess, yeah, I'm at the side now where I'm learning. I'm still learning every day and, trying to figure it out. I'm still figuring it out.
Thank you for your honesty, because this is exactly what I wanted for this podcast to be, something that is raw and honest and that people can relate to. And I guess one last question is, if there was somebody out there that was, struggling and going through the hard things that are connected to being neurodivergent and navigating life being neurodivergent, what would you say to them?
Man, hang in there. You're not alone. Really look into getting help. Do not leave it late. And I think that's a big one. I'm hoping if there's anyone who is listening, especially if you're a bit younger, the earlier the better to look into these things. Don't leave it late because um it saves you a whole world of complications later on. Doesn't mean if you're older life can't get better. I'd like to think positive in that way, but as they say, prevention is better than cure. So, or basically, if you oh god, not that one. How a stitch in time saves nine. That's the one. That's the correct one. Yeah. So, because the earlier that you look into these things, you get a diagnosis. Maybe if you want to go on medication, you want to seek therapy or whatever, the earlier, the better so that it doesn't develop into something worse because, ADHD has been linked to, things like diabetes, fibromyalgia, a lot of other perhaps other mental health, depression, of course, things like that. You might wonder how that's possible. Well, it is because actually, I don't mind saying I did get diagnosed with diabetes, and I could see why because I loved sweet things, sugar, anything to make me feel happy. And so, if you suddenly live your life suddenly eating that way, then ta-da, you're going to, yeah, yeah, exactly. See, like, because initially, if you say these things to people, they might think, what's the link? It might just sound like some kind of health statistic document
Yeah.
that people say. But no, it's true. People who have ADHD most likely like sweet things. And then if you carry on with that lifestyle, you might end up diabetic. People with ADHD, perhaps there's going to be perhaps a lot of anxiety issues and depression, things like that. If you overstress your nervous system for so many decades, you might end up with something like fibromyalgia, which basically your body, you just hurt all the time. You have body pains, you don't even know what's wrong, and it's like your whole nervous system is just misfiring basically. And this is like long-term illnesses, and they're not easy to treat because They're just not. So I think early intervention, maybe find a society or group or, people to talk to. It really helps when you meet people like us. It helps you feel like you're not alone, and other people can give you advice how to do life, how they do it, how they do things, what decisions they made. You might get tips and tricks here and there from other people as well, so that you're not alone. That being alone thing is it isolates you and makes things worse. So don't be alone. Go out there, find some help.
Thank you so much, Dalton. I really love this time together. And thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your honesty and sharing your story.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
The Spacious Brain podcast will come back soon with a new episode and new stories to share. So stay tuned and follow me now, before you forget.